Hello and welcome to the She Reads Romance Books podcast, the ultimate show for romance book lovers looking for the best books worth reading. I'm your host, Leslie Murphy, and in each short episode, I share my favorite book list of recommendations so you know exactly what to add to your must-read list. Join me as I explore the romance genre and have fun collecting book boyfriends along the way, because life is better with a love story. Hello readers, it's Leslie with She Reads Romance Books, and it's still February, and something about February being the month of Valentine's Day, the month of love, makes me feel like I need to turn up the heat a little bit with my reading. I don't know what it is. I think it's Valentine's Day, but whatever the reason, in today's episode, I am going to share 10 steamy romance books that will definitely turn up the heat for you this month. So if you are a fan of spicy romance books and love a bit of open door action, then these are the romance books for you to add to your must-read list. There's 10, so I'm going to kind of fly through them, but each and every one, like I said, you're just going to absolutely love. They're favorites of mine, and I cannot help but recommend them for all of you steamy romance book lovers. Now, I should also say that the books on this list are not books on my best erotic romance books list. You can find those on podcast episode 32, as those really bring the steam. But instead, I wanted to share some books that definitely have open door scenes, but that when thinking about them, the steaminess of the relationship between the characters is just off the charts. It's what I think of when I first glance at these titles, as opposed to any other part of the storyline or the trope that they might have. There are definitely, I should say, more steamy romance novels that I have read and loved, and you can check out my entire list on shereadsromancebooks.com. But I picked these because, as I said, the steamy factor is what made me love these books so much. So let's dive in with the first one being Beautiful Bastard by Christina Loren. Now, this writing duo has written a lot of books, but this one was pretty much one of their first, which released way back in 2013, and it's honestly one of their best, along with the entire Beautiful series. But this one always sticks out as a steamy one because of the enemies to lovers chemistry between Bennett and his new assistant, Chloe. She is working for him while completing her MBA, and he doesn't go for workplace hookups, but the two of them are just too tempting for each other, and things get pretty hot and steamy at the office. The chemistry and the tension between these two, it's so hot. But this one made my list for two particular scenes that take place in the office. One in the conference room, or boardroom, I guess, as they call it, and one in the stairwell. So just get ready to fan yourselves, people, when you get to those particular scenes. This is such a great book, and if for some reason you haven't yet read it, make this your year to do so. I think Christina Loren just released refreshed covers for Beautiful Bastard, as well as their next book in the series, Beautiful Stranger. Both definitely beautiful new covers and books that are super steamy. Just trust me and go ahead and read them. All right, next on my list is Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. And you might not be surprised to hear this title because I talked about it in one of my podcast episodes about romance books where adult toys get in on the action, but I just had to give it another nod in this episode because it's honestly one of my favorite romance books of all time. I love this book because it's just impossible, honestly, not to love Eve, who always seems to be messing up in the eyes of her family, and who actually comes to discover that she may be on the spectrum in this storyline. And then there's Jacob, who he thrives on control, but totally loses it when Eve hits him with her car and he ends up breaking his arm, leaving him in a lurch to run his bed and breakfast. I just loved how these two came to know and support one another when she basically moved in and became his chef for the bed and breakfast. But man, there is one scene, obviously, I kind of mentioned it in that previous episode, where things get really steamy and Jacob has no problem bringing in her favorite toy. So, yeah, it's really good. It totally surprised me because I wasn't expecting it in this book. I think it was the first Talia Hibbert book that I'd ever read, but man, did I love it. And I just loved the entire book. All right, number 3 steamy romance on my list is Twisted Hate by Ana Huang. Now, all of the men in her Twisted Love series, right, are these strong, dominant alpha males. But in Twisted Hate, this is another enemies to lovers romance. It was just so steamy whenever Josh and Jules got into it. See, Josh is the older brother of Jules' best friend, and he's never liked Jules because he thinks that she's a bad influence on his sister. These two are like oil and water together, but after one steamy night, they decide to strike up an enemies with benefits relationship. And honestly, the steaminess just continues from there. Of course, walls then drop and they let each other in. But man, whenever I think of this book, I always think of how hot their hate sex is. One of Anna's best books, hands down. All right. My next steamy romance that I highly recommend for so many reasons is Him by Serena Bowen and Kennedy. I seriously think that this, and I've probably said this before, I'm sure, the book, or at least one of the first romance books that I read that made me fall so hard and so fast for this category of queer romance. I just love this book. It too is one of my favorites of all time because Him is just honestly the best, as is its follow-up, Us. It's a great bi-awakening book between two friends who reconnect at hockey camp, and it's super steamy as this bi-awakening sort of unfolds. I mean, they're sharing a dorm room as counselors at this camp. And, dorm rooms are mostly drab, boring rooms and without a lot of space. And what Jamie and Ryan get up to in those single beds is just, damn, it's freaking hot. And honestly, just an overall really great friends to lovers romance that I always recommend time and time again. Another romance that is super hot and super steamy is Heated Rivalry by Rachel Reid, which has a really great new cover, by the way, that I just saw. It no longer has the two shirtless bodies on the cover, but now it's its own graphic cover, I guess, to go along with the trend. But this book is another enemies to lovers romance, and quite possibly that's probably why I love this trope so much, since it lends to some really great steamy and spicy books. But the tension between these two competing rival hockey players is just unreal. I mean, they don't even really talk much, I think, during their hookups whenever their teams are in the same town. And maybe it's the secrecy of their relationship and the quick nature of their hookups that make them so hot. But it's kind of like they're competing in the bedroom just as much as they are battling each other on the ice, making for some really great spicy scenes in this awesome hockey romance. Okay, next up on my list of steamy romance books is American Queen by Sierra Simone. I'm sure it's no surprise that one of Sierra's books is on this list, but this one in particular, man, it had me in awe of Sierra's work as soon as I read it. It is book 1 in her new Camelot series, of which the entire series is just honestly super spicy and super sexy. I think there's just, although saying this right now makes me want to gag, but there's something about the President of the United States and his First Lady and his Vice President in a throuple that is just wow. It's steamy because of the dynamics between each of them separately as two together, but also as a group. But then the one scene at the end of the book, holy freaking hell, Sierra went there for all three of them to be together and share their love. It was probably the first scene of its kind that I read, and I honestly won't forget it. I can't really say what happens because that would totally ruin it for you. So you just have to read this King Arthur, Lancelot, and Guinevere inspired story. It's super hot. A similar book that made my list is Give Me More by Sarah Cate, which is part of her Salacious Players Club series, where each owner of a sex club explores their own particular kink. And maybe I mentioned this in my episode on kinky romance books. Honestly, I can't really remember, but I love it, so maybe I did. But in Give Me More, Hunter realizes that his kink might be the idea of sharing his wife with his best friend Drake. And Sarah, his wife, soon actually gets on board with the idea. So this is an MMF book. I really enjoyed it, not just honestly for the steamy parts, but those I of course did, but for the relationship dynamic that developed between these three. As I said, of course it made the list because it was super steamy, where everyone gets in on the action with each other. And I think the scenes where Hunter realizes that there may be more to his feelings with Drake were some of my favorites and really, really great. Okay, I'm sort of flying through these, so hope you're still with me. Next on my list is The Bet by Max Monroe. I included this one because it was just a really fun read and steamy, but not in the sense where it was like overly salacious or you'd feel like you need to read this like with closed, curtains or whatever. It's an opposites attract, let's just have a fling romance in their Winslow Brothers series. So Jude is the brother that never gets serious in a relationship, and he fills in for a stripper at a nightclub one night, and he's kind of horrified because he instantly becomes attracted to the bride who he's like all up in and stripping for. But he soon learns that it was actually the bachelorette's twin sister that he was lusting over. And the two of them start this hot and heavy affair. But in a book, as I said, it's kind of like a fun rom-com at the same time, even though they had some really super steamy moments throughout the book. So definitely high on spice, high on great characters. It was or is one of my favorite Max Monroe books. Okay, next up is a book, quite honestly, an entire trilogy and series that was super steamy. And I think now that I'm talking about it, I'm going to have to go reread it soon because it's been a while. And I really miss these two so much. And I'm talking about Halo by Ella Frank and Brooke Blaine, which is one of my all-time favorite rock star romances. This is a book about the band TBD, who just lost their lead singer. He walked out on them, so they're kind of desperate, looking for a new guy to join their crew. And leading the charge to find the right bandmate is their lead guitarist, Viper. And when Halo walks into the audition, Viper is just completely taken with the man's voice and person, despite Halo being straight. And what transpires is this incredibly hot and steamy romance where the chemistry is just sizzling between Halo and Viper. And it continues into book 2, entitled Viper, and into book 3, Angel. And I mean, as you can assume, I guess Halo isn't as straight as he once thought. Trust me when I say you're going to binge read literally 1 through 3 in Kindle Unlimited once you start this book, because these two are just fire. Nothing honestly seemed to exist besides these two in these books, and I was totally okay with it because I was just enthralled and couldn't get enough. So definitely put all of those books on your TBR list. Now, my final steamy romance recommendation is book 2 in Sawyer Bennett's Wicked Horse series, and it's called Wicked Lust. You should honestly just read all 5 of the books in this series about an adult sex club, but I don't think I've highlighted Wicked Lust before, but it definitely deserves its due. This one is about Kane, who is in charge of security at the Wicked Horse Club, but who also participates in, shenanigans and also in creating scenes for members. Then there's Sloane, the undercover reporter who wants to sort of blow the lid off of this secret sex club. Now, every time I think of this book, honestly, I immediately think of two scenes that are so freaking steamy. I mean, they're just, oh my gosh. Sawyer really went all in with these scenes. The first one you get right away when you start the book and is a role play scene that Kane is asked to do for a married couple. Then the second scene is later in the book when Sloane confesses what her ultimate fantasy is, and Kane sets it up for her with the help of a few, yes, you heard me right, a few of his buddies from the club. This was totally steamy and definitely a book that should be on your TBR list and read ASAP. So, oh my gosh, I thought this would take me forever. I flew through those 10 steamy romance books, but as I said, there's even more in my full book list, which you can find on shereadsromancebooks.com. If you have a particular recommendation or a question to ask, don't forget that you can always ask me by sending a short voice memo through SpeakPipe. And I'll include a link for that in the show notes, as I'd love to hear from you. I will include your question or thoughts in an upcoming episode and then share mine back to you as well. Don't forget that we are wrapping up the February romance book reading challenge this month, which is to read one erotic romance. So I'd say, honestly, if you read any of these from this list, that would totally count. But the choice is definitely yours. Be sure to sign up for my newsletter at shereadsromancebooks.com/join to find out what my weekly reading challenges are, which I only share in my newsletter. I am also dropping a new, you heard that right, new book boyfriend quiz, which you can take also by visiting the site. It's super fun. I just love creating quizzes, and I felt like I needed to update my book boyfriend one because there are now a couple of new different boyfriend types that you might find in taking that quiz. So I hope you head over there and take it and have some fun along with it. And of course, I always give some recommendations based on your answers as well. But as always, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, happy reading, because life is better with a love story. That's all for this episode of the She Reads Romance Books podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and found some new books to add to your TBR list. If you did, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast app. It really helps me reach more romance book lovers like you, and I appreciate your support. If you're a book boyfriend collector like me, then you'll want to join my email list so you never miss a podcast episode or a new book list. Just visit shereadsromancebooks.com/join and sign up today. As a thank you, I'll instantly send you my list of top 10 book boyfriends that will make you swoon. Trust me, you don't want to miss this list. Thank you for listening, and until next time, happy reading.